It had been 3 years since I had felt any emotions remotely close to this. A feeling so deep that it's almost impossible to describe. A feeling that scared me, but also excited me. The feeling of being wanted. It was a dreary Friday afternoon in mid-2016. I watched as the clock ticked closer and closer to 2. I was eager to head back from my internship and get to the one thing that managed to bring my emotions back to life. I sat anxiously, looking at my phone every couple of minutes, waiting for the clock to strike 2 gao. Finally, 2 gao came. I frantically grabbed my keys and wallet and headed out the door. As I walked to my car, the dark, heavy clouds littered the sky and the smell of rain came over me. I felt the cool rain on my face while it peppered my heather-grey shirt. I picked up my pace and continued to walk to my car. I grabbed the soaked handle of my mid-2000s coupe, opened the door, and sat down behind the wheel. I put the key in the ignition, shifted into gear, and pulled out. As I drove silently through town, memories of past texts started popping into my mind. I started to mentally dissect past messages, trying to figure out what our relationship was. Dismissing the messages and chalking it up to me reading into it, I began to reflect on our time together as friends. It's hard to describe the feeling. Any time we were together, things felt simple. We could talk about almost everything and joke about almost everything. But the one thing I loved most was how she made me feel, physically. It was unlike anything I had felt before. It was a deep feeling, like a boulder was sitting on my chest. I felt nervous, but at peace. Again, it's hard to describe, but a feeling that I have yet to replicate. I made it. 2:15. I pulled into the parking lot, my brakes screeching as I backed into my assigned spot. I put the car in park and yanked up the e-brake. As I sat watching the droplets of rain race down my windshield, a loud ding-ding echoed from my phone. Hoping it wasn't an "I don't need a ride" or "I'm taking the bus" text, I opened my phone. The message reads, "Are you here?" Not wanting to answer immediately like a desperate loser, I waited a couple of minutes before responding. "Yes, let me know when you're on your way out." Not a second went by before she responded, with a simple, "Okay." The minutes passed as I stared forward, waiting for my fellow classmates to erupt from the exit doors. Finally, I saw the students start pouring out. I watched and waited until eventually I saw her emerge from the crowd. Laughing while walking with her friend, she looked at me in my car and waved with a huge grin on her face. I looked back at her smiling as I returned a small wave. As she approached my car, I felt my heart beating faster and faster. She opened the door and climbed into my passenger seat. She looked up at me, smiling as she said, "Hey, how was your day?" I started up my car and cautiously backed out of my parking spot. We exchanged some casual conversation as I navigated my way through the busy, rainy lot. As we pulled onto the main road, I noticed that something was different. Her demeanor seemed more reserved than usual. We looked back at one another as we continued our conversation. We talked about how after I dropped her off, I had to go back to the school to load up for the state championship for our swim team. She had just joined the team that year and surprisingly was supposed to be there too. However, she wasn't able to make it. I always liked driving her home through the back roads because it gave us more time to talk, laugh, and just be together. Eventually, we made it to her house. I slowly pulled up to the curb, put the car in park, and then looked at her. She stared back at me. This time there wasn't the silly banter before saying something like, "Thanks, I'll see you on Monday. Insert stupid joke." This time it was serious. That was when I knew. This was the moment I had waited for. I would finally be able to tell her how I felt. But the fear and anxiety of losing her rushed into my mind. Silence. I couldn't say it. We sat for another moment, staring into each other's eyes, listening as the thunder rumbled in the distance and the rain continued to cascade down the windshield. Finally, we broke our gaze. The rain began to lift. She reached for the car door. The tension in the car was almost unbearable. She looked at me, opened the door, and said, "Okay, well, have a good time. You're going to do great. I wish I could be there with you." "I wish you could be there too," I replied. She crawled out of the passenger seat, shut the door, and then looked back at me with the same gaze as before. I returned the look, started my car, and watched as she disappeared behind her front door. She knew. "Fuck," I muttered as I pulled away from her house. What now? I thought. Based on the tension we both felt in the car, I knew she felt the same way that I felt about her. I continued to drive down the winding road, gripping my steering wheel tighter and tighter. I kept glancing back at my phone, waiting for a text, something that would ease my nerves. Even a simple "thanks for the ride" would have sufficed. Nothing. I slowly pulled into the empty parking lot to load up for state. I threw the car into park, turned the key off, and opened the door to start my trek to the van. Right as I grabbed my bag from the back seat and shut my door, the rain started pouring out of the dark, heavy clouds. Trying not to fall, I sprinted to the van. I swung the trunk open, threw my bag in, then climbed through the side door and found my way to the back seat. I sat waiting for the rest of the team, peering out the window, watching as the rain continued to drench the ground. I couldn't stop thinking about her. I couldn't get that moment out of my head. Why didn't I say something? I thought. Why didn't she say anything? My mind continued to race with these hypotheticals. Finally, I saw some of my fellow teammates emerge from the rain. My good friend and teammate entered the car. We exchanged a "what's up?" Damp from the rain, he plumped down into the seat beside me. Eventually, the rest of the team slowly trickled into the van. Once everyone was in, we were off. I'm normally a very talkative guy, always trying to make others laugh, but I sat silently as the van navigated its way onto the highway. My friend, we'll call him T, looked at me and could tell something was up. He tapped on my shoulder. I turned to look at him. He said, "Dude, what's going on with you?" "Nothing," I replied. He responded with, "I know you, man. You're never this quiet." T knew that I had been texting and giving this girl rides home for about a month now. In fact, T knew her before I did and was actually the one who introduced us when she joined the team. I reluctantly started to brief him on what happened. Surprised, T laughed and said, "Are you kidding me? You didn't say anything. I could tell you were into her. Why didn't you tell her how you felt?" Was it really that obvious? I thought. I looked back at him and said, "Yeah, I didn't think she felt that way about me. But that moment in the car was just different, man. I could tell she felt it too." T responded with, "Why don't you just text her?" "It's not that easy. I don't want to seem desperate," I said. T scoffed. "Really?" He said, If what you're saying is true, then I doubt she'll take it as desperate. Okay,